All right, hello, natural disasters classes. This is Mr. Mounts, and we're going to be doing the last little section of our Chapter 3 Earthquake Notes by screencast. This slide right here is, it should be familiar to you. We actually did talk about it already. It's just for point of reference. It shows how two similar earthquakes, that is similar in size or magnitude, actually the one on the west coast is slightly bigger, can have far different response by people. I mean, here we are on the east coast, we're freaking out with the 5.8, and the folks over here with the 6.0 barely even notice it. So that's just kind of our point of reference right there. So primary and secondary hazards of earthquakes. If you think about it for a second, like how many people actually get killed in earthquake by being shaken to death, right? Or maybe falling into a rupture or some sort of a crack that opens. Probably not too many. It's really the secondary hazards that really affect the most. We looked at liquefaction today, all right? And if you're in a house or some sort of structure that experiences liquefaction, you're in the bottom story of that. You can actually be sucked into the ground right there. So you can have the land actually change elevation as a result of the earthquake. You know what that happening if you're in the wrong spot. Landslides right here. This is huge. All right, landslides are oftentimes triggered by earthquakes, and if you're in the path of that, it can be very, very deadly, especially if it's very watery landslide. Fire. In fact, we know that in 1906, the majority of San Francisco was leveled to the ground, not so much by shaking, a lot of it was, but much more of it was leveled by fire. Of course, tsunamis are fresh in our memory. In fact, we'll look at it a little bit later. In 2011, the Japan earthquake, really, the shaking didn't do as much damage as the tsunami itself did. So the tsunamis can, much like fires and landslides, cause widespread damage. And you can also have disease as well. If you have water mains underground that are ruptured, it can really taint the drinking water, and if you can't get access to drinking water, it can really perpetuate disease. So those are some of the secondary ones right here. The primary threat, of course, is just shaking, but very few people get killed by being shaken to death. It's really a lot of these secondary hazards right here. So if you see a ground rupture, you're going to see what we call like a fault, okay? But if that fault stays exposed and is kind of like this scar on the Earth's surface, we call it a scarp. In fact, I think we looked at a place in Google Earth where it was in the middle of the San Andreas Fault, and there was a scarp running through this guy's backyard, his field. So, all right, so what else is going on with earthquakes right here? Well, the shaking itself, all right, so that's a primary hazard. It does cause damage to buildings and bridges and all different kinds of structure just by being, rattled back and forth. All right, here's your building right here, okay, and just the ground moving back and forth is going to loosen that foundation from the ground. Resonance, I mentioned briefly today. Resonance is where, let's say you have a tall office building. If you get a little bit of shaking back and forth, and that shaking kind of propagates its way up to the top of an office building, the office building having a certain, you might say, internal frequency, can rock back and forth a lot more than it normally would just by the shaking of the ground, because the waves resonate back and forth inside that structure right there. So that can really amplify some of the damage done to buildings by earthquakes. All right. So we talked about liquefaction and how if we have water that is close to the Earth's surface, like groundwater, the shaking will actually cause that water to well up. So here's our Earth's surface right here. Here's some water in groundwater form right here. The shaking of that causes the water to seep up to the surface, and the reason for that is because the particles like the dirt particles that are usually on top and the water's on the bottom, those dirt particles get shaken apart, and so water is able to seep up in between. So buildings that would otherwise seem to be completely on solid ground can just float into the earth and just sink right in because of this liquefaction. And the real pain is after the shaking stops, the water sinks back down and the ground recompacts. Unfortunately, it recompacts around your car or around your house that is now half sunk into the ground. So that's a real pain trying to get things out after they've been liquefaction, we'll call it. All right, landslides. Again, a little more detail. Simply the shaking is what. So we have a mountain right here, okay? And so there's stuff that's maybe a little bit over steepened right here. It's the shaking that loosens it, and then it's simply gravity that brings it down the rest of the way, down to your house or your neighborhood or wherever you may be. The one that happened out in Washington State, all right, cost hundreds of lives because this landslide flowed down over an entire community, and many people died. Also, rivers can be blocked. In fact, this did flow across a small river, and water is actually diverted and backed up. So landslides are a real secondary hazard that come from. All right, look at this right here. Now, this isn't really a river going through right there. It's actually a glacier. But you can see how if that was a river, then this landslide would absolutely dam that river up and cause some real interesting water issues in terms of where the water is going to flow. All right, so fires. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I've got underground gas lines coming to my house. All right, so whether it's natural gas or otherwise, that underground gas is going to rupture, and you can have all kinds of leaking gas. This is what I meant to highlight: power and gas lines, but also heaters as well. And supposedly the Great Chicago Fire had nothing to do with earthquakes, but was a result of simply a heater getting knocked over or a lamp, supposedly by some lady's cow. But anyway, remember back in 1906, almost every single building was heated by some sort of like a potbelly stove. All right, and so those stoves get knocked over, then you're going to have fires spreading inside the house. All right, and finally, disease. Really, sanitation is the big issue. Right here, let me erase that little thing. All right, sanitation and water supplies. I mean, if you got people that are without water, they're without electricity for a long period of time, you can't shower, you can't get clean drinking water. Sanitation is going to be a real issue. All right, just the general pollution of the water. If you got water lines that are ruptured, it really contributes to disease and career. All right, so in the future, how can we possibly predict or at least reduce the effects of earthquakes that may happen? Well, taking a look at where earthquakes do and don't occur. I pointed out an article to you guys, I think today, that is on Schoology, where it says, hey, along the San Andreas Fault, there have been very few earthquakes recently. All right, that's actually bad, because if you do have several earthquakes, that's pent up energy that is being released. You get no earthquakes, that means that you have a higher degree of likelihood of a large earthquake happening. Rather, a lot of small steps than one big step. And of course, this elastic strain right here, you want that to be released as often as possible. And this is just kind of restating that right there. Right? The San Andreas Fault, wherever we don't see earthquakes happening, that's kind of a reason to be nervous, because that strain is not being released. So, how can we prevent earthquakes? Well, we can't. All right, they're going to happen because the Earth's processes are going to keep moving. All right, but we as humans can actually kick off earthquakes. We can actually cause them ourselves, and part of it is the way we deal with water. Right, if we build a dam, all right, or some sort of reservoir right there, that's millions and millions of gallons of water, and water is actually pretty heavy. So you put all that load on the land, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on underground faults, or even possibly make new ones. All right, and so that can kick off some earthquakes. This second one is actually kind of nasty. One way we get rid of liquid waste, that is liquid human waste, instead of going into a septic system or some sort of water purification plant, is just to inject it straight into the ground um, through through disposal wells. So instead of getting nice clean water out of the ground, we're putting nasty water just into the ground and just letting nature take care of it. I guess the science is good for that, but to me that just seems just still kind of nasty. Um, but in just a second, right here, we're going to look at how this can actually correlate to greater earthquakes. Um, and this is actually kind of interesting. Underground nuclear explosions. If you look up Area 51 on Google Earth, there is a place called Area 51, and it's in southern Nevada. And not far from it, you're going to see a whole bunch of divots in the ground, or very large divots in the ground. They're actually underground nuclear explosions. We've ceased nuclear testing above ground many decades ago. We continue to do it underground, but those underground nuclear explosions, as big as they are, can actually kick off earthquakes. Sometimes they're even mistakes. This is kind of interesting. This is the pumping down of human waste. Look, see, it's brown. All right. So this has been done in Colorado and a couple of other different places, but this right here is kind of an interesting correlation. So this top graph right here is the number of earthquakes between 1962 and 1965. All right, and down below here is how much that is, I think in cubic meters per month we've pumped down into the ground. And it's almost a perfect correlation between the amount that's been pumped into the ground. None right here. Look, almost no earthquakes in this late 63, 64 era. And then 65, we got a lot of this stuff being pumped into the ground. Earthquake numbers shoot back up. So there must be a very, I'm not sure if it's a cause, but there definitely is a correlation between waste into the ground and earthquakes.